Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content.
Joe Boyle, thousands of miles from his home in Canada, sits in a train car that he's commandeered from the Bolsheviks. He's got crates and crates of humanitarian aid for the war-torn people of Romania, and some boring old wicker baskets. But the baskets aren't holding his lunch. They're holding the crown jewels of Romania. 50 miles out of Moscow, the train stops. Routine stop at a small town, right? Not quite. Joe hears something. He sneaks around and looks. Some guys, camouflaged against the snow, are sneaking around and trying to decouple Joe's train cars and make off with the crown jewels, not to mention the humanitarian supplies. Joe balls up his fists and punches the guys out. He recouples the train cars, and the train and everything it's transporting is free to go on, for now. But there's still the rest of the journey. Can he get his precious cargo through over 1,500 miles of snow and civil war? Of course he can. He's Klondike Joe Boyle.
Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, this episode is going to air the day after Christmas, but we're recording it the week before. So I was just curious if you have any plans for the holidays.
Yeah, I'm going to be traveling up and down the East Coast, visiting various friends and family, hanging out, eating cookies,
Nice. You're going to be bringing all your podcast gear, though.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
We're both going to be loading up our holiday travel with all of the gear to record our podcasts in new and interesting locations in the future.
Yes. How about you?
We are going to be going up to Canada to go skiing.
Ooh.
So there's we're getting a place with a couple other families that a couple of them have kids. And so it'll be like a fun little weekend of skiing and hanging out and doing stuff like that.
Nice.
And it kind of got us thinking when we were talking about that. I'm driving up into British Columbia. So I'll be up in like the Whistler area, and which is kind of a ski resort kind of thing. Nice log cabins with fires and sipping wine and beers and eating whatever hamburgers and stuff. That's kind of the easy mode of Canadian adventure lifestyle. But there's also a hard mode. To the Canadian wilderness. And we had been talking about, you're going to go to Canada. Maybe we should do a Canadian badass. We haven't really talked about many Canadians on the show yet. I think the only one we've talked about was the Resolute, the ship, which is now based out of New Zealand, so no longer Canadian.
Yeah, but an actual Canadian human who is from Canada and doing badassery. Maybe even in Canada, maybe in other parts of the world.
And that is going to be what we're going to encounter here today. There's that common joke that I'm sure Canadian people love, where Americans think that they're just like very polite people. But if you've ever been to a hockey game, you realize there is kind of a violent side to the Canadian culture. And one of my favorite quotes about the people of Canada is by Winston Churchill. He was talking about the Allied forces in World War II. And he said, if you gave me British officers, Canadian soldiers, and American technology, I think I could conquer the world. So that's high praise. Yeah.
Okay.
And the guy we're going to talk about today, Klondike Joe Boyle, he is a great example of that spirit. And he's going to embody really all kinds of interesting, adventure-y, badass things. Every element of a good badass, he's going to espouse it here, and he's going to demonstrate how it works.
Excellent. Bring it on.
So here's the short version on Klondike Joe Boyle. He was a Yukon lumberjack secret agent who managed a Stanley Cup hockey team, outfitted a World War I machine gun company, received military honors from England, Canada, France, Romania, and Russia, stole the Romanian crown jewels from a vault in Moscow under the noses of the Bolsheviks, hijacked a train, probably had an affair with a Romanian princess, and once fought a shark in hand-to-hand combat armed with nothing more than a hunting knife. This is Klondike Joe Boyle.
Don't you mean hand to fin combat?
Right, I think it's more like knife to face combat, but knife to tooth combat. But,
okay, yeah.
But
yeah,
yes. Yeah. We are going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about Klondike Joe Boyle. Joseph Whiteside Boyle was born November 16th, 1867 in Toronto. He was from a relatively wealthy family. His father bred racehorses in a place called Woodstock. And they had this big farm where, as Joe was growing up, he could spend his days. He was swimming, he rode horses, he shot guns. He had a pretty happy lifestyle growing up. When he was 17, Joe followed his father on a business trip to New York City. And while they were hanging out there, this is New York City in the 1880s, Joe started hanging out down by the docks because that's kind of where all the action was happening in town. And he met this old sea captain who apparently they got along really well because the captain was like, hey, do you want to go on a 3-year voyage on a wooden sailing ship across the Atlantic? And Joe was like, yes. And definitely going to do this, jumps on the ship, and then just has a guy go find his father and tell him, hey, Joe's not coming back. He's a sailor. Don't wait up. He'll be back in a couple years.
At least he had the courtesy to text his dad,
yes.
as it were. And his dad, I mean, once this has happened, what can his dad do? That ship has literally sailed. So
that ship has sailed. Yes, that's true. Well, okay, so Joe Boyle, I mean, he'd been on sailing boats in the lake on his family's property and stuff, but he hadn't been on like a big wooden sailing ship on the high seas yet. And so he's out there and he's kind of literally learning the ropes. I think that's probably where that expression comes from.
I think so. Yeah. Or I like that. Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. So he's learning the ropes. He's
learning to tie knots or whatever it is that you have to but he's doing the thing. He's out there on the Atlantic and apparently he works really hard because everybody likes him. And they like him more one day where there is a thunderstorm arrives and the ship is getting tossed around on the waves. And one of the guys on the ship gets thrown overboard.
Oh no.
And he hits into the water. And then it gets worse because there's sharks in the water. And one of these sharks starts attacking this sailor while he's floating in the water. And so what do you do when you're Klondike Joe Boyle? I guess he's not Klondike Joe Boyle yet. He's just Joe Boyle. But he does the thing I mentioned in the top of the show. He puts a knife between his teeth, takes off his shirt, jumps in the water, and starts knifing the shark to save his buddy. And remember, this is during a thunderstorm, like a torrential downpour, lightning, all of that. He jumps in the water. The ship's getting tossed around. People are trying to throw lines and ropes to him. And he knifes this shark and frees the guy, and they both make it out alive.
Wow.
So instead of jumping the shark, he jumped on the shark. And that was the first thing he did.
It's emblematic of what's to come.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so this ship is probably cursed or something because they get across. They're outside off the coast of Ireland, and there's a shipwreck. And so the ship explodes, and he's in the water, and he drifts out, and he lands in Cork County, Ireland. He has no cash on him. He has none of his gear. It's all sunk with the ship. And so what do you do? Well, he finds a job working as a tour guide in Cork County, Ireland.
Of a place he just washed ashore at.
Literally washed up on the shore not that long ago. Yes. He finds a job as a tour guide, I guess.
Okay.
And
well, this is where Anne Bonny's from, right? So maybe there's something in the air that helps people sort of manage and live their own best lives somehow.
That's true. I forget. This is where Anne Bonny came from. So, so he lands in Cork, and they were like, "Oh, you fought a shark. Great. You can show people around here.
You can handle tourists.
You're qualified.
Yeah.
Can I see your resume? Well, I dive bombed the shark with a Bowie knife. Yeah, that's probably fine." So great. He works as a tour guide in Cork County, Ireland, which will be one of the more mild-mannered jobs he has in his career, even though he got it by shipwrecking on shore in a place he'd never been before and finding a way to make a living there. He earns enough money to catch a boat back to New York City. And then he gets there, and within a week of arriving in New York City, he is married to somebody he met. Yeah. He gets back to New York City, he meets a woman, and he marries her within a week.
He seems to adapt to circumstances quite rapidly, shall we say.
Yes, that is a good way of putting it. When he wants something, he goes after it, I guess.
Apparently.
So he starts an animal feed business. He has 7 kids, and he manages a boxing club where he helps up-and-coming boxers, gives them some fighting experience, and arranges some exhibitions and fights for them. Okay. Cool. So that's going pretty well until 1897, when this is the kind of the Yukon gold rush. The news is starting to arrive in New York City that like they have found gold in the Yukon and there are like fortunes to be made out there. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. But Yukon is extremely far away from New York City and also from Joe Boyle's hometown of Toronto.
So it's on the other side of the continent. It's maybe more an idea rather than an actual place for people who are hanging out on the East Coast. It's like you hear of it. There is gold. But getting there, it's far. And he's pretty successful here. He's running the boxing thing. He's got his own business. The Yukon is far. So I live in Seattle, which is as far northwest as you can basically get to the Canadian border. Like I'm very close. I told you I'm going up to Vancouver for the weekend. I'm driving there and it takes like 3 hours. So nice. I'm very close to Canada, and the Yukon is the northwesternmost province in Canada. But for me to drive to Whitehorse, which is just kind of right across the border of the Yukon, it's 34 hours by car. By car, yeah, which is faster than people would be traveling in those days. So
right, 34 hours by car from Seattle, which is, like I said, as close as you can get. That's how far north the Yukon is, how far away it is from the United States. I mean, I guess not including Alaska. But so, okay, hey, they found gold. That sounds like an adventure. Joe Boyle does the reasonable thing here. He divorces his wife. He leaves his family behind, and he goes on an insane, life-threatening overland journey to take part in the Klondike gold rush.
Oof. So he has to go all the way from New York to Yukon. And
he goes with an Australian boxer named Frank Slevin, who I assume was one of the boxers that was part of his operation. And they go on this crazy journey across all of the US and Canada, like literally coast to coast. There are not cars. They are making this trip by foot and horse and snow sled dogs. And they're paying for their trip. They're making money by setting up boxing exhibitions, like little fight club kind of fighting exhibitions where he and Frank Slevin will, they'll either organize local boxers to fight or they'll fight against local boxers. So they're able to make some money doing this, but it's not a lot. And this journey is expensive and it's far and it's cold. You got to buy supplies and provisions and all this stuff. When they finally arrive in Dawson City, Yukon, the two of them can combine to produce $22.
Okay, which probably went farther in those days than $22 today. Like $22 today, that's lunch and a coffee.
No kidding.
In those days. In those days.
In those days, it was a little better, but it's still...
a little bit more, but still. Yeah.
It's still not, like, it's not enough to get you home. And
no, it's nowhere near striking it rich territory.
Yes, it's not enough to get you home if this doesn't work out. And... spoiler alert, this is going to work out. They are both going to be up to their necks in Klondike gold by the time they leave Dawson City. Dawson City, it's kind of this cowboy frontier town. It's on a permafrosted glacier. It's high in the mountains. I mean, picture those black and white pictures of the Yukon gold rush where people are, I mean, there's no Gore-Tex here. They're wearing like furs and leather and getting frostbite and altitude sickness and falling off mountains and stuff. They're using like literal rope and not paracord. This is a tough place, right? And these guys have to be pretty tough to survive there. Joe is able to make some cash. He works as a manual laborer. He does some boxing. He works as a horse jockey for a while. And then he's able to get some money together, which he then immediately blows trying to pan for gold. So he buys a little plot. He gets all set up.
Makes sense. That's why you go out there.
Right. He gets there. He's got the $22. He can't afford to like create an operation just yet. He makes a little bit of money. He starts panning for gold. He doesn't find anything.
Then what happens?
Then he decides, look, I'm not going to do this. He becomes a pioneer on a technique called dredging, which was pretty new at the time. So remember, this is like the 1880s, 1890s. And he built a machine that that would basically like dig all of the sediment and soil up from the bottom of a lake or a river and try to mine gold out of there. So there is gold in the ground in the Yukon, and people are trying to kind of like strip mining for it, basically. And he's like, oh, I wonder if like I could pull it out of the rivers and the lakes. So he starts doing that. Builds these big machines. So he's
using engineering skills here.
Yes, he is. So he starts digging this up, and he finds gold, and he finds a lot of it.
Woohoo.
And yes, he gets a lot of gold. He sets up a logging business. He sets up a hydroelectric power plant. He becomes so rich off of all of this gold that he becomes known as the King of the Klondike.
Whoa.
Which is not bad, because a lot of people are here. A lot of people are making it rich here, and way, way, way more people here are freezing to death or going broke and having to run home with their tail between their legs. So great. He's successful at this. Awesome. So what does he do next? He's a big sports fan, and he's an endless promoter. He's been doing all of these boxing promotions. And in 1905, he puts together a crew of hockey players and decides he's going to challenge the Ottawa Senators to the Stanley Cup, because that's just a thing you could do back in 1905.
Okay.
Yes.
You mean you just get together a bunch of people and say, "Hey, we're signing up for the Stanley Cup"?
Yeah, we want to compete for the Stanley Cup. Okay, great. Okay. This is 1905. I mean, the goalies aren't wearing masks, that kind of thing, like that time period of hockey. And he gets a bunch of guys together who work on the various operations, the logging operation or the gold mining operation, just like big, strong Yukon dudes. And he puts together a hockey team of them, and he challenges the reigning Stanley Cup champions to a match for the cup. And I love that you could just do this in these days. Like it would be like today, like some, like beer league team in Edmonton just being like, I'm gonna challenge the Pens for best of 7 for the Stanley Cup. And then you show up there and everybody kind of like is already drunk and like they throw up on Sidney Crosby or whatever. Yeah, I would definitely watch that if that was a thing. I would definitely watch a bunch of like drunk idiots get beat 37-0 by the Boston Bruins, right?
And our particular drunk idiots, they're the Dawson City Nuggets, yes?
The Dawson City Nuggets. And I hesitate to call them drunk idiots, but they do party hard.
I'm not surprised.
So Dawson City is 4,000 miles from Ottawa, right? Yes. And Klondike Joe has just made this trip. He came from New York out to Dawson City, and I was going to go back to Ottawa. And remember, this is not going to be, you can't get on the team plane and fly out there, right? It took 23 days. And this is like, the Oregon Trail was not that long ago, right? It's that style. You're Oregon Trailing your stuff over mountains, rivers, forests. They're going by dog sled, train, steamer ship, more trains, walking, horseback, all of this stuff, right? They're dragging all their gear with them. They get seasick, they get rained on, there's icy roads, and they have this epic journey over 4,000 miles across the entire width of Canada. And finally, they arrive and they challenge the Ottawa Senators, the Silver Seven, which is a very famous lineup for this hockey team. This team was basically unbeatable. They're considered one of the greatest hockey teams ever assembled. And these dudes guys from Dawson City are going to
show up on their doorstep and...
Yep. Hey, let's play.
Okay.
Stanley Cup on the line.
Okay.
So how do you think they did?
Well, okay. So on the one hand, they're going up against the Silver Seven. And they've had a strenuous journey. On the other hand, these are the Dawson City Nuggets. We've got Klondike Joe, who apparently can do anything and put up with anything and doesn't blink when he's faced with a shark, for example. Not that they had sharks on this particular journey, but, so
there's bears. They got big bears.
Okay, they had bears. I'm guessing, well, they're the underdogs. I tend to root for underdogs, so I don't know. Did they put up a good show and maybe not beat Ottawa, but give them a run for their money?
No, they were slaughtered. They got massacred. They went out there. They've been thrown up over the side of steamer ships for 3 weeks. They've been traveling by dog sled. They got there. They were all beat up and tired and exhausted. And they were never going to be able to compete with Ottawa talent-wise anyway. In the first game, they lose 9-3. And a decent number of the players on the Nuggets get ejected because while they are not going to win and they are going to get beat and they're going to get beat badly, they are going to fight these guys, which is a thing that is legal in hockey. It's the only sport in the world where you can literally punch a member of the other team in the face in the middle of a point and you don't get ejected from the game. There's actually rules in place in ice hockey for attacking members of the other team with physical punches, right? And still somehow several members of the Dawson City Nuggets managed to get themselves ejected from this game for fighting too much or being too violent.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty high bar.
They didn't have the talent to skate with the Senators, but they could knock them down. And this is probably why they stopped allowing any drunk idiots to challenge the Stanley Cup champions to ice hockey, because you really don't want your star players getting injured in a scenario like this. But this does speak to the character of the Dawson City Nuggets, that these were tough guys. And I'm sure they were like, hey, whatever, this is just how we played in Dawson City, you wimps. So it was a best of 3 series. They got beat 9-3 in the first game. And then in the second game, they lost 23-2.
Oy.
Which is still to this day a record for the worst defeat in the history of the Stanley Cup.
Ouch.
Ottawa's star player was a guy named Frank McGee, who he scored 14 goals in that game, which is still an NHL record for the most goals scored in a Stanley Cup series.
Okay.
McGee was also kind of a badass. I do want to talk about Frank McGee for 1 second. He was pretty badass. He was one of the original 9 members of the Hockey Hall of Fame. And then he went off to World War I and was killed in action fighting the Germans in France. So he's a pretty badass character as well. But scoring 14 goals in a game is pretty impressive, even if it is against a relatively amateur team of the Dawson City Nuggets.
Yeah.
I think they should bring it back. UConn doesn't have an NHL team. They should bring back the Dawson City Nuggets campaign.
Yeah. What would their mascot be? A nugget, I guess.
A nugget, probably, yeah.
Goes around punching people.
Yes. Just a really angry nugget. Really angry gold miner.
So what did they do after they had been defeated so soundly? Did they go crawl away and hide under a rock?
No. So after the finals were over, Ottawa invited Dawson City to come out and party with them after that 23-2 beating. And the two teams went out and had a bunch of beers and got hammered and got in trouble because they were trying to take turns drop kicking the Stanley Cup across the Rideau Canal in downtown Ottawa.
No.
Yes. No. Drinking beer out of the Stanley Cup is a bucket list item for me, but drop kicking it over the canal in Ottawa
just doesn't seem like a good
drunkenly idea. Right, and so that's the Dawson City Nuggets, right? They'll punch you in the face in the middle of the game and get so hard they get ejected for it, but then afterwards you want to hang out with them. This is kind of a good analog for Joe Boyle too, just violent and just really, really going all out all the time.
Yeah.
100%, no off switch, no filter. But at the end of the day, you still want to hang out with them for some inexplicable reason. So as I mentioned with Frank McGee is killed in action during World War I, and that's where this story is headed. But let's stop right there and hear a word from our sponsors. And we're back. Let's pick right up where we left off. So that Stanley Cup was 1905. World War I begins in 1914, and Canada is part of the Commonwealth, and they are expected to contribute soldiers to the army to send people over to France to fight the Germans in World War I.
And I'm assuming that Klondike Joe is going to want to be involved in some way because he's got skills, he's got interest, he's got energy.
Exactly. So
how old is he at this point?
He's 49, which is not it's beyond draftable age, right? The draft kind of ends at 35.
Okay, but he's can 49. Volunteer and say, hey, I'm Klondike Joe. Please give me something to do.
Which is basically what he does. So he uses his own money to recruit a 50-man machine gun company of the Canadian militia.
Oh, wow.
He outfits them with uniforms, equipment, machine guns, ammunition, all the stuff he buys himself. And then he kind of just shows up and is like, hey, I'm Klondike Joe. I have a machine gun company for you. Are you interested? Yes or no? The Canadian militia says yes. They make him an honorary lieutenant colonel, despite the fact that he has no military training or experience.
He has experience.
And he's
not military, but he has experience.
he has experience leading people and leading companies and fighting.
Leading
but
hockey teams
not
across thousands of miles of Canadian wilderness. And
that's true. That is logistics, and that is what most of war is at the end of the day. And he's got this big personality, and people want to follow him, and people are inspired by him, right? So he's given the uniform of a lieutenant colonel in the Canadian militia. And he loves this uniform. He's very proud of it. Never takes it off. He's never seen in public. From the day he gets it, he is never seen in public again without it, including when he later on in his career will start going on special operations behind enemy lines.
Where you're supposed to be clandestine and not noticeable.
Yeah, exactly.
What would you do for a Klondike bar? But what wouldn't Klondike Joe do? Something. We can workshop that line.
I feel like there's a joke to be had there.
Yeah. Hey, listeners, if you come up with a better version, please let us know.
So he goes over to Europe with this machine gun company, and he is eventually he's deemed he's too old to fight in the infantry is what the British government decides, right? So he brings this machine gun company over there, but he doesn't lead them into battle. They serve in the Canadian militia forces in World War I, but he doesn't go with them. He's a little too old, so they make him an officer of the Royal Engineers because he had engineering skills, and maybe his talents are a little bit more geared towards that. So, of course, the British Army sends him to Russia to aid the forces there in their struggle against the Germans. So he goes to the Eastern Front, and he is helping what's known as the White Army, which is kind of the nationalists, the pro-democracy Russian forces in their struggle against both the Germans and the Bolsheviks, the communists, who are also trying to take over. So in 1917, he ends up taking over the Russian transportation department and starts setting up rail lines between Petrograd and Odessa.
Don't turn around. There are railway commissars in town. Don't worry, I'm keeping my day job. So, so he shows up, he gets handed management of Rostov.
And builds a rail line from Petrograd, which is present-day St. Petersburg, to Odessa in Ukraine. And so that's a pretty big rail line, and he's in charge of building it.
He is not fazed by geography, apparently.
Not at all. So, yes. So let's kind of recap up to this point. Joe Boyle was from Canada. He goes to New York City. He jumps on a boat randomly because he felt like it. He fights a shark, jumps into the water to fight a shark to save one of his crew members, gets into a shipwreck, washes up in Ireland, where he becomes a tour guide, and then makes his way back to New York, has an entire life there, leaves that to go to the Yukon, finds gold, competes for the Stanley Cup, raises a machine gun company to fight in World War I, and now he is sailing over here to Europe. They put him in charge of the Russian Department of Transportation, where he's building rail lines. Cool.
Okay.
So remember that World War I is still going on, and you really can't put Joe that close to the action without expecting him to get his hands dirty.
Of course.
And in 1917, he somehow finds himself in the middle of the Battle of Tarnopol. With the German army is overrunning Russian positions all throughout the city. There's no Russian officers kind of taking control here. So Boyle, he is an officer of the British Army, and he organizes the defenses of the city. He commands, it's a rail hub, probably why he was in town for it. He ends up organizing the defense of the city, and they repel the German attack. And apparently he showed so much heroism during the battle that Tsar Nicholas II of Russia actually awarded him the Order of St. Stanislaus, which inducts him into an order of Russian knighthood that dates back to the days of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
Wow. Okay, that's shiny.
Yeah.
I bet he's really proud of that. If he was so proud of his uniform earlier, he must be really chuffed about this.
Yes, that big star is going directly onto that uniform, and it's never coming off.
Yeah. Okay.
So the Tsar is overthrown in 1917, and the first revolution is the Democratic Revolution that overthrows the Tsar, and they're trying to install democracy. And so Boyle stays on in Russia after that. He was the Department of Transportation head. They know a good thing when they see it. They keep him working for the provisional government. He becomes the railway commissar, and he's tasked with basically getting 10,000 train cars full of men, weapons, and gear to the front lines of the war. The provisional government wants to end the war, but they're slow about it, and they're too slow about it, and that's why they get overthrown. But
it seems like the premise for a tabletop game.
It is. And there's crazy stuff here, right? So Joe Boyle takes control here and he starts maneuvering weapons and gear and trying to run the logistics, not of the Dawson City Nuggets trying to get over to Ottawa, but for like reinforcements from, Siberia to get over to the front lines in Europe to fight the Germans.
Yeah, much higher stakes.
Yes. And they are, train cars are being like dragged down the sides of mountains.
Dragged down the sides of mountains?
I believe is literally what it sounds like.
Okay.
People and machines with ropes dragging train cars down the sides of mountains when there's collapses or railroads getting blown up. So it's a war zone. There's artillery. There's things blowing up all over the place. It's cold. It's mountainous. It probably looks fairly similar to the Yukon, but it's Siberia this time.
Okay.
And now he's Siberia, Joe Boyle. The February Revolution is the provisional government, and then in October, that's when the Bolsheviks take over, and that's Lenin and the Marxists and the communists. And
he had been on the side of the White Army, so
he had. Well, so they keep him on because they're hurting for skilled people in this position, right? He's doing a good job at what he's doing. He is a central worker here, but he's not feeling great about this, right? He is a British officer, and the British were working against the Bolsheviks, and he worked with the White Army, and he got this nice, pretty order of St. Stanislaus from the Tsar, who is not a friend of the Bolsheviks. And so he's like, all right, I got to get out of here.
This is Klondike Joe or Siberia Joe or whatever we're calling him now. My guess is he doesn't just politely leave and peace out and fade into the distance.
Tender his letter of resignation. No.
2 weeks notice.
That's not what happens. Klondike Joe, he is one of the other things he has been doing throughout this entire process is because he has built this rail line from St. Petersburg to Odessa. He's tasked, in addition to bringing weapons and supplies to the front lines of the war, he is also trying to bring humanitarian aid, food, and clothing to the people of Romania, which is where a lot of this war is taking place. The Romanian people are suffering in World War I and in the revolutions that are going on around this time. And so
because they're right in the middle between all of these countries who are not friends with one another.
Right. They're kind of stuck in the middle here, and they're suffering. And one of his big projects is to bring food and clothing and medical aid to the people of Romania. So that's great. But for whatever reason, he learns that the Bolsheviks have come into possession of the crown jewels of Romania, as well as a large portion of the country's gold wealth. And they've relocated it to a bank in Moscow for, quote, safekeeping during the war. And, the Bolsheviks need money, and their ideology does not really suggest that they're planning on returning the crown jewels to the aristocrats of Romania.
And Joe likes shiny things, and he likes an interesting project, shall we say?
And he likes the Romanians, and he doesn't like the Bolsheviks because he's worried they're going to kill him. And so what does he do? What is the rational thing to do here? There is a heavily secured vault in Moscow that possesses the crown jewels of Romania. It is guarded by Bolsheviks who probably are one bad day away from having you thrown in jail as a foreign agent and executed.
Okay.
You're Joe Boyle, though. It's 1918, and you are a guy who has a history of getting something in his head and going after it immediately. So, what do you think?
Is he going to Ocean's 11 up this place and just go in and yoink the jewels and the gold and hightail it out of there? And I don't know what he's going to do next, but seems to me that Joe is going to get the jewels. I mean, it's such a cliched thing to do, but this is screaming jewel heist to me.
It's a jewel heist.
It's a jewel heist. Woo! I love a good heist.
It's not just a jewel heist, though, because it's even more intense than that. This isn't like the Minions movie where they steal the crown jewels and run away, right? Or Ocean's 11 even. Because not only does Joe Boyle steal the crown jewels of Romania out of a secure facility in Moscow, he also loads that train up with hundreds of pounds of gold from the Romanian treasury. The
Romanian treasury, which is currently being held in Russia for quote-unquote safekeeping.
Right. Yeah. The Russians have taken it from Romania for safekeeping, and they're going to hold it in Moscow. And don't worry, you'll get it back. When the communists decide they're willing to give it back to the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie, we'll let you know. So Joe gets a train in Moscow. He liberates the crown jewels of Romania and a decent portion of that country's treasury wealth, loads it all into 2 commandeered railway cars, and then runs it 2,500 kilometers through a civil war to deliver it back to the Romanian people. And this is like great locomotive chase vibes. Like this is not a casually riding on the rails being like, maybe they haven't noticed that I stole all that stuff yet. This is like, there's only one direction I can go here. So you know I've got the thing and you know where I'm headed.
Yep.
At one point along the way, they're at this train station and the manager there is with the Bolsheviks and he refuses to let Boyle pass, even though Klondike Joe is still officially the senior member of the transportation department. He doesn't panic. He has to find a way to get this train out of basically impound. So he decides, okay, what am I going to do? He organizes a party, like a huge party, a music concert and just a massive like dinner, whole shindig, whole event.
He's good at logistics.
Yes. All of the train party officials can come. There's, whatever. Anybody's invited. We're going to sing, dance. We're going to have music. We're going to have this tea. This really fancy tea that I brewed for you guys. That's basically just like straight 151 whiskey.
Okay. Tea.
And of course, everybody drinks it and they get drunk. And he uses that opportunity to cut the telegraph wires, hijack those trains back again, and get out of there.
Okay.
He does this. He escapes. He goes through this war zone. He's being shot at. He's being chased. He's being waylaid at various stops along the way. He doesn't know if the next stop he gets to is going to be in control by the White Army or the Red Army or the Germans. And he's carrying 2 trains that are literally loaded with gold and jewels. And it's just him. It's just him and a couple other guys who are not heavily armed. This isn't an armored train or anything. This is a railway car. And but he does it. He steals the crown jewels of Romania from Lenin and gets it back to Romania. And this is around the time that he starts to have a relatively intimate relationship with Queen Marie of Romania, who's probably pretty grateful to have the crown jewels back.
Yeah, and we can't go into depth here, but she was Marie of Romania. She was English. She grew up learning how to ice skate and even play ice hockey, which I mentioned because it seems relevant in the circumstances. And
something from them to talk about.
Yeah, shared interest. And she was in an arranged marriage to Ferdinand of Poland. And the two of them didn't really click on a personal level, but as sometimes happens in aristocratic arranged marriages, they developed a good working relationship. And Ferdinand in particular grew to respect Marie's better knowledge of the world. And Marie became an influence kind of behind the scenes, but also acknowledged publicly on much of Poland's policies in World War I. So by 1914, she was queen. Her husband was king, but she was queen because she was married to him, but she was pretty influential. And she advocated for Romania entering World War I, and she, being an aristocrat, was able to contact her relatives all over Europe to get the best possible terms for Romania. She got involved with the Romanian Red Cross and, along with her daughters, visited hospitals. She visited soldiers with cholera. And she was pretty talented. Okay, also pretty privileged. Also talented. She was a prolific author. She published about 36 books and short stories. She threw herself into life, and she had a reputation for being kind of a party animal. She, according to some sources, she had affairs. The paternity of some of her children was questioned. And some of this might be exaggeration or opportunistic propaganda, but the takeaway is that one way or another, Marie lived life to the fullest, and whatever the exact details of the truth of the matter, it's quite easy to see how people of the time were shipping her and Klondike Joe. Lots of shared interests, lots of shared vibe.
They did get along really well. We know they got along really well. They wrote a bunch of letters to each other. They will be friends for the rest of their lives. Some people suggest that, like you said, affairs and paternity and all that stuff. Yeah. Joe gets implicated in some of that. We don't know for sure. And we never will probably. But she was a big proponent of Joe Boyle and a big fan of his and the work he was doing for Romania, and she liked him on a personal level.
Yeah.
All right, so Joe is in Romania, and there is some speculation that perhaps he stole the crown jewels for her. That's like kind of the romantic version of the story, is that like he knew her before he stole the crown jewels and he stole her jewels back for her or whatever. But I think that might be one of those things that we keep talking about where they write the erotic story version of the
fan fiction version.
Yeah, the erotic fan fiction. Yeah, after the fact. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it's fun to think about. So Joe Boyle is now, he's in Romania, and he can't go back to Russia after this.
He cannot show his face there. He cannot.
No. So he starts working with the British intelligence, the kind of pre-SOE, the burgeoning like British spy service. And he starts running undercover spy rings operating in Romania and southern Russia, primarily against the Soviet Union, but also a little bit against the Germans as well. He starts relaying information back. He creates this network of spies because he's good at networking.
He's good at logistics. Yeah.
And he starts sending information back to London about the Soviets and the Germans, their movements in World War I and then after as well. So in the Between Wars period. One of the achievements that earned him a lot of fame in Romania was he personally negotiated the release of 50 Romanian nobles who had been taken prisoner by the Bolsheviks in Odessa without bloodshed, just negotiating it and made that happen. And that was such an impressive feat that he earned the Star of Romania, which is like their Medal of Honor, the highest honor in Romania. It made him a national hero. The king declared him a savior of Romania for all of the work he had done, not just with the negotiating those nobles release and stealing the crown jewels of Romania, and also like bringing all of the food and aid to the people who needed it, which is pretty great. He attended the Paris Peace Conference that ended World War I think as a guest of Marie, who was also there. And that's the Treaty of Versailles, like he was there when it was signed. And then after the war, he was able to negotiate and secure roughly $25 million in humanitarian aid that he distributed to the people of Romania.
Nice.
So he ends his military career, that jacket that he got from the Canadian militia for raising 50 Yukon dudes to have a machine gun company. He ends up with the Star of Romania, the British Distinguished Service Order, the Russian Order of St. Stanislav, and the French Croix de Guerre for his service to all of those countries during the war. He's got high-ranking, very high medals from, 1, 2, 3, 4 different countries, none of which was his own. So
Indeed,
that's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
He dies in England in 1923 at the age of 58.
And there's a story that every year after he died, on the anniversary of his death, a mysterious woman dressed in black would visit his grave. And these visits continued until 1938, which happens to be the same year that Marie of Romania died. Draw your own conclusions. Bum, bum, bum.
So that's Joe Boyle, Klondike Joe Boyle. He was a boxer. He was a sailor. He fought a shark. He found gold in the Yukon. He competed for he managed a Stanley Cup team. He stole crown jewels. He fought the Bolsheviks. He fought the Germans. He partied with the Queen of Romania. And I just think this guy's life, it reads like a fiction novel. It reads like something out of a comic book, you know?
Yeah. What would you do if you're Klondike Joe?
Yes. A lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Hijack a train from the communists and
Fight a shark.
run it through a war. Fight a shark.
Steal back some crown jewels.
Punch a member of the Ottawa Senators.
Throw parties.
And so that's Joe. And he's awesome. I love this story. It was one that from the early days of the website, I've been wanting to tell this story. So I'm really glad I got to do it today. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys as always for listening. We hope you had a really great holiday. Please do try to remember to like and subscribe and do all of that stuff because that does help us out. And thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are Andrew Jacobs, me, Pat Larish, and my co-host, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and Ben. Story editing is by Ian Jacobs, Brandon Phibbs. Mixing and music and sound design is by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeart. Badass of the Week is based on the website badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions, ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and your enemies if you want, as we'll be back next week with another one. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.